let's get into our lesson today, our Shabbat teaching. And we're going to skip around just a little bit in this teaching. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to read all of Genesis 37. We're going to skip 38. Then we're going to go to 39 through the rest of the Torah portion. Okay? So we're going to start Genesis 37. Yaakov continued living in the land where his father had lived as a foreigner, the land of Canaan. Well, here's the history of Yaakov. When Joseph was 17 years old, he used to pasture the flock with his brothers, even though he was still a boy. And once when he was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, he brought a bad report about them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph the most of all of his children because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a long-sleeved robe. And when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they began to hate him and reached the point where they couldn't even talk with him in a civil manner. Joseph had a dream, which he told his brothers, and that made them hate him all the more. And he said to them, "Listen, while I tell you about this dream of mine, we were tying up bundles of wheat in the field when suddenly my bundle got up and stood upright. Then your bundles came and gathered around mine and prostrated themselves before it." And his brothers retorted, "Oh yes, you will certainly be our king. You'll do a great job of bossing us around." And they hated him still more for his dreams and for what he'd said. Well, he had another dream, which he told his brothers. "Here, I had another dream, and there were the sun, the moon, 11 stars prostrating themselves before me." He told his father too, as well as his brothers, but his father rebuked him. "What is this dream you've had? Do you really expect me and your mother and your brothers to come and prostrate ourselves before you on the ground?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. After this, when his brothers had gone to pasture their father's sheep in Shechem, Israel asked Joseph, "Aren't your brothers pasturing the sheep in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." And he answered, "Here I am." And he said to him, "Go now, see whether things are going well with your brothers and with the sheep, and bring word back to me." So he sent him away from the Hebron valley, and he went to Shechem, where a man found him wandering around in the countryside. The man asked him, "What are you looking for?" "I'm looking for my brothers," he answered. "Well, then please tell me, where are they pasturing the sheep?" And the man said, "Well, they've left here because I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. Well, they spotted him in the distance, and before he arrived where they were, they'd already plotted to kill him. And they said to each other, "Look, this dreamer is coming. So come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these water cisterns here. And then we'll say some wild animal devoured him. We'll see then what becomes of his dreams." And when Reuben, heard this, he saved him from being destroyed by them. He said, "We shouldn't take his life. Don't shed blood," Reuben added. "Throw him into this cistern here in the wilds, but don't lay a hand on him yourselves." He intended to rescue him from them later and restore him to his father. So it was that when Joseph arrived to be with his brothers, they stripped off his robe, the long-sleeved robe he was wearing, took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty without any water in it. Then they sat down to eat their meal, but as they looked up, they saw in front of them a caravan of Ishmaelites, coming from Gilead, their camels loaded with aromatic gum, healing resin, and opium on their way down to Egypt. And Judah said to his brothers, "What advantage is it to us if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelim, instead of putting him to death with our own hands. And after all, he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers paid attention to him. So when the Midian, the merchants, passed by, they drew and lifted Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for a half pound of silver shekels to the Ishmaelim, who took Joseph on to Egypt. Now Reuben returned to the cistern, and upon seeing that Joseph wasn't in there, tore his clothes in mourning, and he returned to his brothers and said, "The boy isn't there. Where can I go now?" They took Joseph's robe, killed a male goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. Then they sent the long-sleeved robe and brought it to their father, saying, "We found this. Do you know if it's your son's robe or not?" And he recognized it and cried, "It is my son's robe. Some wild animal has torn Joseph to pieces and eaten him." Jacob tore his clothes and, putting sackcloth around his waist, mourned his son for many days. Though all his sons and daughters tried to comfort him, he refused all consolation, saying, "No, I'll go down to the grave to my son mourning." His father wept for him. In Egypt, the Midian sold Joseph to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, a captain of the guard. Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's and captain of the guard, an Egyptian, brought him to the Ishmaelim who had brought him there, had bought him from the Ishmaelim who had brought him there. Adonai was with Joseph, and he became wealthy while he was in the household of his master, the Egyptian. His master saw how Adonai was with him, that Adonai prospered everything he did. Joseph pleased him as he served him, and his master appointed him manager of his household. He entrusted all his possessions to Joseph. From the time he appointed him manager of his household and all of his possessions, Adonai blessed the Egyptian's household for Joseph's sake. Adonai's blessing was on all he owned, whether in the house or in the field. So he left all of his possessions in Joseph's care, and because he had him, he paid no attention to his affairs except for the food he ate. Now, Joseph was well built and handsome as well. And in time, the day came when the master's wife took a look at Joseph and said, "Sleep with me." But he refused, saying to his master's wife, "Look, because my master has me, he doesn't know what's going on in this house. He's put all his possessions in my charge. In this house, I am his equal. He hasn't withheld anything from me except yourself, because you're his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" But she kept pressing him day after day. Nevertheless, he didn't listen to her. He refused to sleep with her or even be with her. However, one day, when he went into the house to do his work and none of the men living in the house was there indoors, she grabbed him by his robe and said, "Sleep with me." But he fled, leaving his robe in her hand, and got himself outside. And when she saw that he had left his robe in her hand and had escaped, she called the men of her house and said to them, "Look at this. My husband brought in a Hebrew to make fools of us. He came in and wanted to sleep with me, but I yelled out loudly. And when he heard me yelling like that, he left his robe with me and he ran out." And she put the robe aside until his master came home. Then she said to him, "This Hebrew slave you brought us came in to make a fool of me. But when I yelled out, he left his robe with me and he fled outside." Well, when his master heard what his wife said, as she showed him, "Here's what your slave did to me," he became furious. Joseph's master took him, put him in prison, in the place where the king's prisoners were kept. There he was in prison. But Adonai was with Joseph, showing him grace and giving him favor in the sight of the prison warden. The prison warden made Joseph supervisor of all the prisoners in the prison, so that whatever they did there, he was in charge of it. The prison warden paid no attention to anything Joseph did because Adonai was with him, and whatever he did, Adonai prospered. Now, sometime later it came about that the Egyptian king's cupbearer and baker gave offense to their lord, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh became angry with his two officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. So he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard in the prison, in the same place where Joseph was kept. Now the captain of the guard charged Joseph to be with them, and he became their attendant while they remained in prison. One night, the two of them, the king of Egypt's cupbearer and his baker, there in prison, both had dreams, and each dream with its own meaning. And Joseph came in to them in the morning and saw that they looked sad, and he asked Pharaoh's officers there with him in the prison of his master's house, "Why are you looking so sad today?" And they said to him, "We each had a dream, and there's no one around who can interpret it." And Joseph said to them, "Well, don't interpretations belong to God? Tell it to me, please." Then the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. "In my dream, there in front of me was a vine. The vine had 3 branches. The branches budded, then it suddenly began to blossom, and finally clusters of ripe grapes appeared. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, so I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and gave the cup to Pharaoh. And Joseph said to him, here is its interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office. You will be giving Pharaoh his cup as you used to when you were his cupbearer. But remember me when it goes well with you and show me kindness, please. Mention me to Pharaoh so that he will release me from this prison. For the truth is that I was kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and here too I have done nothing wrong that would justify putting me in this dungeon. And when the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, he said to Joseph, well, I too saw in my dream there were 3 baskets of white bread on my head. In the uppermost basket there were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds ate them out of the basket on my head. And Joseph answered, here is the interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from off of you. He will hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh off of you. On the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he gave a party for all his officials, and he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer back to his position so that he again gave Pharaoh his cup. But he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to them. Nevertheless, the chief cupbearer didn't remember Joseph, but forgot him. What I want to focus on this Shabbat is the life of Joseph, and especially what this tells us about life itself. I think I can sum up where we'll go today with this passage from Romans chapter 8. Romans chapter 8, starting in verse 28. Furthermore, we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called in accordance with his purpose. Because those whom he knew in advance, he also determined in advance would be conformed to the pattern of his Son, so that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. And those whom he thus determined in advance, he also called. And those whom he called, he also caused to be considered righteous. And those whom he caused to be considered righteous, he also glorified. What then are we to say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? So the story of Joseph is clearly meant to inform us a great deal about Jacob's 11th and most beloved son. And it reads almost like a novel. And it has a script that is ready-made for a Hollywood movie. Now, Act 1 of the story of Joseph portrays him as a young man that has little wisdom or discernment just yet. Act 2 becomes dramatic and tragic as his lack of wisdom and his family's infighting and jealousies take a terrible toll. Act 3 brings us to a surprisingly happy ending that seemed all but impossible, considering everything that had happened previously. Now, here's the thing to notice. If you delve into any part of this story and you separate it and look at it closely, you probably assume that the only possible outcome is a terrible family unraveling. A family is eating itself alive. The elderly father is either oblivious to reality or is not able to take care of his own family or to bring unity and order among his own sons. This is the poster child for a totally dysfunctional family that a psychologist would have a field day with. Now, even so, if you back up and look at the entire story of Joseph, you notice that each act in the story, each twist in the plot, actually is needed in order for it all to arrive at a happy and God-ordained conclusion. See, there's much similarity between the story of Joseph and the story of Yeshua. Two Bible characters who have always been compared. Everything in their lives seems like one tragedy or challenge after another. Yeshua was shunned by his own brothers, rejected by the people of his hometown of Nazareth, and he is regarded as a heretic and a rebel by the Jewish religious establishment. He is a person that one might identify today as being an oddball, a troublemaker, a goody two-shoes that turns off most people. In reality, Yeshua, like Joseph, came from another world. Yeshua from a divine spirit world who has to live as a stranger in his own land. Joseph, the son of Jacob, is very much the same, as he is an outcast, not welcome in the camp. Both Yeshua and Joseph are misunderstood by their brothers, even by their parents. They're despised by family and friends because of the revelation and prophecy and purpose that they each received from God. Joseph's older brothers even want to kill him, but they end up selling him to a passing caravan of merchants so that he will be shuttled off to another place. Where? They don't know. They don't care. Later, Joseph arrives in Egypt, where he's sold to Potiphar as a house slave, but soon becomes the head steward of the house of Potiphar, a higher up in Egypt's government. Next, the innocent Joseph is falsely accused by Potiphar's wife of attempted rape, and he ends up in jail. One could easily end the saga there. See it as a tragic miscarriage of justice or a sad destiny. See, what we need to take from this Shabbat reading is that just as this week's portion recounts one tragedy after the other, that's not the end of the story. The same held true for Yeshua. His death on the cross was far more a beginning than an ending. Where we stand today in redemption history is not the end of the story of Christ's life. Calvary and the cross was not the concluding act. Even Yeshua's resurrection from the dead wasn't the end. The finale has yet to happen. Yeshua is now safe in heaven, just like Joseph was safe in Egypt. Both biding their time, waiting for that moment when the Father gives the signal to set the joyous and improbable ending into motion, neither knowing when exactly that will be. The good Lord has, for his own remarkable reasons, seen fit to give me many decades of life and the experiences that inevitably come with it, to see that until we breathe our last, our story is never fully written. In fact, even upon that final breath, more lies ahead, especially when we are believers and truly trust our Maker. I have learned that what can seem so inexplicably tragic, so illogical or unfair an outcome, so sad and heartbreaking at the moment, can and regularly is miraculously used by God for a greater and higher purpose. Purpose well beyond us to see or imagine, if we'll just allow it. Primarily by not becoming cynical, rigid, and unteachable. I have had to learn to redefine what the term normal means. Practically take the word abnormal out of my vocabulary. Nothing is more normal in our lives than for seemingly abnormal things to happen. I ought to get a big amen for that one. Woof. But after all, this is the world. This is not heaven. It's corrupted. It's chaotic. But then, one day we look up and something unexpectedly wonderful has happened. It's come from all. That without everything that happened previously playing out just as it did, we never would have arrived at this point. See, Joseph, in the most implausible way, went from a hopeless pit in Canaan to becoming second in command to Pharaoh in Egypt. He found himself leading the world's most powerful empire and most advanced civilization of his day, and not by his own ambition or design. Egypt, in the days of Joseph, ruled territory that ranged from Tunisia in North Africa all the way to the Arabian Peninsula in the east, to Somalia in the southeast of Africa. The wealth and power and technological knowledge of ancient Egypt can still be seen and visited today. No one in modern times has yet figured out how, with only human and animal power, the Great Pyramid, with its 2.5 million cut stones, each weighing from 2 up to 50 tons, could have been handled and stacked with such precision as it was, or how it could have even been transported there in such a vast number. Let's return now to the opening of chapter 37. The first verse tells us something important. The prophesied destiny that Isaac had given to his twin sons and his blessing of them was unfolding. Jacob now lived in the promised land that God said would be his, and his brother Esau has left it, living away from the fertile ground, away from the predictable rainfall. But another part of a prophetic blessing from a time earlier than Jacob, even earlier than his father Isaac, is near to coming pass. The Abrahamic blessing that for a time the Hebrews would live as strangers in a foreign land and be oppressed. A blessing that seemed much more a curse than something to be wished for. Genesis 15, verses 13 and 14. Adonai said to Avram, "Know this for certain. Your descendants will be foreigners in a land that is not theirs. They will be slaves, held in oppression there 400 years. But I will also judge that nation, the one that makes them slaves. Afterwards, they will leave with many possessions." Because Jacob had always favored his wife Rachel, he also favored the 2 children she gave him, Joseph and Benjamin, and especially Joseph. And we are told in verse 3 that Jacob loved Joseph more and apparently made no bones about making that fact very clear. And he further signified Joseph's favor by giving him what most Bibles will say is a coat of many colors. Actually, it was not a coat at all. It was a tunic. It was that his father virtually anointed Joseph as a prince and had him prancing around among his brothers in that kingly garb. The jealousy and the envy that this was bound to cause was going to wind up nearly costing Joseph his life. In fact, the envy grew into hatred of Joseph to the point, as it says in verse 4, that his brothers could not speak to him in a friendly or civil term. Somehow, the oblivious Joseph was aloof to all this sibling rage and hatred that surrounded him. And in youthful naivety, Joseph didn't have the good sense to keep his mouth shut. on an occasion in which he had a dream, the meaning of which was exciting to him, but most certainly it could not have been such to his older brothers. In this dream, he sees these sheaves, bundles of harvested grain of some sort, and there were 12 of these sheaves. 11 of them bowed down to the 12th. Now, picture this teenage Joseph standing there in his regal tunic, all full of himself, telling this story to his 10 older brothers who knew full well this dream's symbolism, that they would someday all submit to Joseph as their master. In verse 9, he has another dream, and it only throws more fuel on the fire. Once again, he can't wait to tell everybody about it. The first dream he told only to his brothers. Now this dream he also relates to his father. Joseph says, well, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed down to him. Well, they full well knew what that meant. But it was even more insulting because in that era, right down to pagan religions of our day, the sun represented the father figure, the moon, the mother, and the stars, their offspring. So Joseph was now saying that not only would his brothers bow down in subservience to him, so would his own parents. His whole family must have thought Joseph was losing it, suffering from delusions of grandeur. Well, apparently the flocks of Jacob's clan were at this time pasturing in the grassy fields and valleys surrounding Shechem, while their home base was in Hebron. And Joseph's brothers were off tending the animals while Joseph stayed at home. So now Jacob wants Joseph to relay a message to his sons. So off goes Joseph, unaware of the precarious situation he was in. It was a journey of around 50 miles. And as he gets near Shechem, a man informs him that the flock had been there, but it moved on to a place called Dothan. And apparently from a vantage point atop one of those hills where they were, the brothers saw Joseph coming towards them, and their hatred now overflowed, and dear old dad was at least 3 days' journey away. They decided there and then to kill him. Now Reuben, the firstborn of Jacob and his son of Leah, intervened. He suggested they not kill Joseph by their own hand, rather they should throw him in a pit, with the idea being that Joseph would just starve to death in that pit and never be found. Now the brothers do the deed, they sit down to eat, and suddenly they spot a caravan of Ishmaelite, Arab traders. Judah, another son of Leah, has an idea. Well, let's not allow him to die in the pit. Let's sell him to the Arabs, and that way whatever happens to him from that point is beyond their control. They can actually profit monetarily by getting rid of Joseph this way, so why not do it? So the brothers sold Joseph to the traders for 20 shekels of silver, the going rate for a male slave. Reuben returns, finds Joseph gone. He tore his garment, a sign of grief and distress. And as the eldest, see, it's he that is going to be held responsible for Joseph's disappearance by his father, Jacob. The brothers devise a deception. They put animal blood on the royal tunic that they had stripped from Joseph before they threw him in the pit, and they take it to their father asking, is this Joseph's tunic? Well, of course, Jacob immediately identified this tunic as Joseph's. The blood on the tunic was proof enough to Jacob that a wild animal had killed and eaten Joseph, such that the brothers didn't even have to tell their lie. Rather, without the least hint of shame, they offered their father comfort. In any case, the last verse, we see Joseph arrive in Egypt, get sold to a very high Egyptian government official named Potiphar. Joseph's a good-looking young man. Potiphar's wife is quite taken with him, and he also, in some way, which we're not told, became prosperous. So apparently he was able to do more than simply serve Potiphar. All we know is that God was with Joseph and he did well for himself and for Potiphar. And we're going to find this statement that God was with Joseph 4 times in this chapter. And obviously it is to make the point that even though Joseph was abandoned by his family, placed into a strange land with strange gods, the God of Israel was still with him, protecting, controlling, and guiding events. Yet another critical life lesson emerges that can so easily be forgotten by believers. Difficult, even bad circumstances don't mean God has turned his back on you. Well, Potiphar's wife was infatuated with Joseph and is constantly after him. He refuses all of her advances. One day, Mrs. Potiphar, tired of being rebuffed by a mere purchased house servant, she grabs Joseph. He runs for his life, but in the doing, she grabs a piece of his garment, and then she decides to take revenge for being scorned. She claimed Joseph tried to rape her, tells her husband, Joseph's thrown into prison. But as Joseph's fate vacillates back and forth, completely out of his control, within no time, Joseph is made supervisor over all the prisoners. Then something happened. Pharaoh became angry with 2 high government officials, the official cupbearer and the chief baker. Now, these were not servant positions, although everybody was, by definition, subservient to Pharaoh. No, these 2 men were likely right in line behind Potiphar in authority. And after some time, Joseph noticed one morning that they both had puzzled and bothered countenances. And he inquired what troubled them. They each reported they had had a dream and they couldn't understand what it meant. And he says, "Tell me your dreams." And we begin to see the level of faith to which all of Joseph's sufferings had taken him as he responds, "Don't interpretations belong to God?" And he says, "Tell me your dreams." And they proceed with the cupbearer going first, and he speaks of a vine with 3 branches, grapes forming on the branches, which he makes into wine for the Pharaoh, and instantly God gives Joseph the meaning. Joseph tells the cupbearer some good news. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will reinstate the cupbearer to his position and all will be well. Well, this seems now to have emboldened the baker, who undoubtedly, as a result of witnessing the interpretation of the cupbearer's dream, expected equally as good news. The baker saw 3 baskets of bread on his head, apparently stacked one upon the other. The uppermost basket attracted birds, which came and ate the baked goods right from the basket while still on the baker's head. Joseph had to tell the baker the bad news, that on the same day that the cupbearer was going to be restored, the baker would lose his life. And of course, that's exactly what happened. Joseph, having shown kindness to the cupbearer, had requested that the cupbearer might do the same for him after being restored to his position. But we are told that now that everything was back to normal for the cupbearer, well, he just forgot about poor Joseph and then just left him languishing away for a crime he had not committed. 2 years pass. Joseph's now 30 years old. Prison is still his home. Well, dreams have so far been nothing but trouble for Joseph. But now that's about to change. The Pharaoh has 2 dreams. They're disturbing to him. Pharaoh tells Joseph that he has had dreams which his brightest and best couldn't interpret, but that he was told that Joseph could. Joseph answers completely truthfully, "It isn't in me." God will give Pharaoh his answer. He informs Pharaoh that both of these dreams are concerning the same matter, a coming time of great famine. For the Pharaoh, the next question was who was going to make sure that all preparations needed for Egypt to survive would be done. Well, the answer was obvious. The man God chose to deliver the message behind the dream should be the one to carry out the preparations, Joseph. The most important things for us to learn from the story of Joseph and his brothers are these. When God moves in you and directs you, it does not always mean that you are going to walk on a smooth path or be accepted and received in society, and often not even by your closest family and friends. Everything God does with you is not always about you. This was true for the prophets of old, true for the fathers of the Israelites. Now, if you believe you've received a revelation, well, you better be sure that it really is from God. See, our own thoughts can easily be confused with God's, especially when it seems to promise success or just plain makes us feel good. How to be sure is a difficult question. However, if you reflect deep in your heart and you're honest with yourself, you consult God's word, and you are willing to take it to other godly people who've proven to have wisdom, that is probably a good course of action to follow. Ask yourself the following question. Am I about to gain something personal? Wealth, honor, position, acceptance, friendship, spiritual authority by claiming to have heard from God? If so, be skeptical. Not of God, but of yourself. Even if you were rejected by your friends and family, persecuted like Joseph, suffer from bad times, doing what you are sure you were supposed to do, you should know that in the end, God's justice and rewards are never forgotten. The Lord is just. He loves all those who diligently seek him and all those who serve him. Like Joseph, the son of Jacob, you will always be amazed by the Lord and his salvation if you will take your life's focus off of yourself. It can seem that sometimes God's too slow to act. Yet in reality, it will always be on time. Perfect. His time, not necessarily yours. I am in the envious position to be able to look back so many years and confirm that this God principle is true, it's reliable, and it's so comforting.
For more teaching and information, visit us online today. Come and be a part of our fellowship. Here at The Seed, enjoy worshiping and learning God's Word with us.